So that's section 1 done and dusted. We move on to section 2, which is about release strategies. Before we begin the deployment process, certain common grounds need to be established among all stakeholders. Each stakeholder must agree to these things. And to do so, we must discuss with all stakeholders. We should try and reach agreements with them and then formalize the agreements in the form of a release strategy. And who are these stakeholders? The stakeholders could be people from your development team, it could be people from your analysis team, right? Requirement analysis team. It could be people from your testing, it could be your operations people, it could be your CEO even, it can be clients, end users, the subject matter experts, it could be government officials who may have a say in your project, because of course your software must pass through all the regulatory authority concerns. So it could be anybody who has a direct or indirect say in the software delivery process. We will discuss in detail what the release strategy will contain, but as of now, please understand that it will be decided by all stakeholders involved. Each stakeholder will have a say in the release strategy. Although the specific contents of a release strategy can be project dependent, these are some common points that will be included in every release strategy. The most important of these, in my opinion, is the definition of role of each stakeholder. Each stakeholder must be told what he is expected to do in the delivery process. For example, the client is expected to perform the user acceptance testing. If he does not agree to this, then how do we perform the user acceptance testing? So we must ensure that the client is willing to perform the user acceptance testing. Similarly, the test team should know that they are the ones who are responsible for running the test. The development team should know that they must work in conjunction with the test team. The operations team must know that they must coordinate with these two teams when deploying the application. So such roles need to be clearly defined, and only if we've done this can we even expect to have a good delivery process. The next most important thing in my books, not sure if somebody else would say the same thing, but to me, I think the next most important thing is the discussions on the deployment pipeline itself. So how do we plan to implement the deployment pipeline? What are the various stages that we plan to have? Who are the people who with whom we plan on giving the authority in different stages? What are the various types of tests that we're going to do? What are the stages that we're going to automate? Are we going to have an automated are we going to have an automated deployment script? All those things. We'll also talk about the deployment tools that we might use in the deployment pipeline, and also about the initial deployment. How will the initial deployment be different from the subsequent deployments? Something that's not written here. Another thing that you will discuss about is rollback. What is the rollback strategy that you plan to adopt in your deployment pipeline? Once that is done, we can say that the next most important thing would be the technical aspects of the application. Are there any technical aspects that need consideration? For example, when you deploy your application in a production environment, how does this particular deployment work with other software? Does this software affect other software's ability to work normally? How does it interact with already existing libraries in the system? Maybe my software is using this library which is already there in the system. How will I use this library? And in case I remove my application, what will happen to this library? Such things, the technical aspects of it need to be discussed. We will also talk about the requirement for APIs for remote monitoring of the application. Does the client require any remote monitoring facilities for logging, for monitoring the application, or such some things like that? Maybe also a discussion on the third-party libraries, right? There are third-party libraries that your application will depend on. There are many third-party applications that your application is going to depend on. So how do you plan on connecting to these third-party applications? Who will get in touch with these third-party applications? Will the client do it? Will the operations team do it? So how is that done? Would you need, are you planning to get separate APIs for it, or are you going to use the API that they are providing? All of that, those decisions need to be made, need to be finalized, right? There could be things related to the product itself, to the production itself, right? To the production environment itself, right? So what is the production environment going to be like? Do you want the production environment to be scalable in the future? Do you want your product to be scalable in the future? Is the production environment going to grow exponentially? Is it going to grow linearly? Such things need to be discussed. So this is all related to production, right? What happens once you've released it, once you've placed it in production? Do you expect the production environment to change, right? Then then of course you can talk about, you need to make discussions about maintenance of your software. Once it is released, how do you plan on delivering future upgrades? How do you plan on delivering bug fixes? And what about application support? What about after sales support? Things like that. Who's going to do that? Is it going to be provided by the client, or are you going to do it yourself? Such things need to be clearly defined. The testing environment is also a point of contention sometimes between the client and the company. uh, the test environment, is the client going to provide the testing environment, or does the client expect me to to create the test environment? How different is the production environment going to be when compared to the test environment? How much of virtualization do you expect in your software, right? And also the deployment tools has already been discussed, right? Such things will be discussed and finalized in the release strategy. Finally, of course, you need a contingency plan, a disaster recovery plan. What happens if everything goes wrong? What do we do? If our software goes berserk, what do we do? Right? Such things will also be discussed. And of course, the procedure related matters, the management side of things will be discussed and finalized. Right. So that's it about release strategy. A moment back, we said that release strategy is associated with the entire software. Right? Version 1, 2, 3, 4. What are the common strategies that we're going to adopt for the entire software? What are those common things that the client expects for the entire software? However, a software is not released is not going to be released only once. It could be released more than once, thrice, or 4 times, 5 times. It can be released many times. So what are those particular points of concern for each of these releases? So when I make my first release, what are the points that I'd like to, what are the points of contention? What are the points of contention for release number 2? What are the points of contention for release number 3? And how do I address these issues is what will be contained in a release plan. I said that release strategy is associated with the entire software, while release plan is associated with each release. Right. So what are some of those issues that need discussion in the release plan? Number one is the kind of smoke test that we plan to use once we deploy our application. Once we deploy our application, we do a few smoke tests. We'll discuss about this later on, but we do a few smoke tests to ensure that our deployment has gone well. And then we'll talk about backing out of deployment. That is, when deployment goes terribly wrong, something bad happens, how do we back out of the particular release, right? And then we will talk about backing up and restoring in case of a failed deployment. These 2 points are quite close to each other. I mean, they have some commonalities between them. So how do we back out and restore lost data, or rather data that has potential to be lost? Okay? Then we'll talk about future upgrades. How do we deliver the next upgrade to the software? And then about data migration and user migration. We'll talk in detail about all these things when we talk about rolling back and also about upgradation. However, for the first release of your software, which is the first time you're releasing your software, there are some special concerns that you need to address. The first release plan must address certain special concerns, right? And the most important of those is the pricing of your product, right? The most important, I wouldn't say it's the most important, but the most obvious one is the pricing of your product, right? Especially if if it's a commercial product, it's a commercial product, what is the price that you're going to fix for this product? And this is beyond discussion. I mean, this is beyond the scope of our particular subject. It is so we're not going to talk too much about it, but please understand that if you are creating a commercial product, then in the first release, then the pricing is going to be a matter that needs to be noted down in the release release plan, right? The next point that needs to be discussed is about licensing your software, right? There are certain intellectual property rights that people try and protect with software. For example, Apple is notorious for its intellectual property rights, right? For the patents that it sold, it's very serious about all those. And then about copyrights. So I don't want to infringe anybody's intellectual property rights when I release a software. When we create a software at home, we don't really think about all this. When we create a software for academic works, we don't really think about this. But when you release a software commercially, you need to think about these things very seriously. What if I affect somebody's intellectual property rights? What if I don't get the license to use this particular library? Or what if I don't get the license to use a particular version of a software, right? Or such things. For example, with Android, you're all familiar with Android, so we can use that as an example. If you want to use Google's version of Android, then you need to obtain a license from Google. If you use it without that, they can sue you, right? Next one is relating to the packaging. It's about the packaging of your software and also about the installation of your software, about the deployment of your software. How do you plan to package your software? How do you plan to deliver this packaged software to the user? Are you planning to use the operating system's packaging tool, or are you going to use third-party packaging tools, or are you going to create your own packaging tool? Similarly, how are you going to make the deployment, right? If it's a web application, how are you going to do it? Is it going to be in a phased manner? What are they going to do, right? Is it going to be in a phased manner, or are you going to do it immediately? Such things, right? And then after that, you need to worry about the marketing of your software. These things are more important for commercial applications, marketing, pricing, right? Such things are important for commercial applications. And then finally, you need to get your support and marketing team ready as well. Right? After sales service, support team, these teams should be ready. You need to note down details regarding that also in your release plan for the first release. There's one point that we have not mentioned, and that is about documentation. Since it's the first release, we're going to note down in this plan, how we plan to perform documentation for the rest of the release. Okay? In this release, how do we document? There's a saying in the industry that if something isn't documented, then it hasn't happened. If something is not documented, then it has not happened. So documentation is very important. It's considered paramount in the in the industry. So a proper plan needs to be made for how you plan to document the work, document the various tests, document the release, document the deployment, document rollback. All these things need to be properly documented so that we have a clear idea of how certain things have happened, right? Okay.